Hello, how are you? Well, it is difficult to speak after the performance of the two atoms, especially if you don't have the accent of this performance. So if you don't want me to speak in English, usually people prefer me to speak in Spanish. They understand better in the United States. But anyway, thank you very much for that performance. Really, it was very moving. Well, I will do some remarks about the foreign policy of Argentina. First, let me thank Mr. Noel Latif, President of the Foreign Policy Association, authorities, members, and friends of this institution. I am very pleased to be here. On behalf of the President, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who had to postpone her arrival to New York, I would like to thank the Foreign Policy Association for having invited her. I would like to thank the Foreign Policy Association, and she asked me to be here. It is a pleasure to be again in this city, especially in the framework of the General Assembly of the Organization of the United Nations, the foremost multilateral event. On this occasion, it is a dual honor for me, as I am here for the first time as my country's Minister of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share an overview of political and economical developments in Argentina, their prospects, as well as our vision for Argentina's integration at the regional and global level. In the past 7 years, I have been a public servant, and I still emphasize the fact that I am serving under a government that has been elected democratically. As you all know, between 1976 and 1983, Argentina endured the most horrifying military dictatorship in its history. It disconnected us from the world, and we became victims of repression, intolerance, and modern obscurity. The country finally began to move forward on a democratic and pluralist path, although not without its setbacks. Now we are back on track, striving to build a more equitable society through development and by coexisting and working to achieve a better future, not only for our citizens, but also trying to contribute to improve the quality of life in our region and around the world. First, we recapture life itself, and then we recover our democratic values and principles. This path was characterized by many milestones which, after the military isolation, we have endured, enable us to reinsert ourselves first in our region and then in the world. Since 1983, our learning process and our return to democracy was accompanied by the need of reinforce the principles that have been disrupted, while boosting the institutions and providing them with an increasing amount of tools for their development and consolidation. The defense of human rights as a state policy that enables the re-examination of our society, along with the multicultural and religious coexistence that prevails in Argentina, is one of the most important achievements of this new democratic era. The constitutional reform of 1994 took into account the terrible experience suffered in the second part of the Soviet in the 70s. Now in my country, international treaties on human rights have constitutional hierarchy. Perhaps due to the devastating past that many of the countries of this hemisphere have suffered, we genuinely understand the value that freedom and democratic institutions have for society. Maybe this is why we quickly perceive any actions that tend to restrict this freedom, always willing to continue striving to ensure that it is never curtailed again. In this regard, and as an example of this, let me refer to our firm position regarding the current human rights situation in Honduras and how important it is that the former constitutional president Zelaya be allowed to return home freely. As of regional integration, Mercosur is already a worldwide recognized process. This regional integration was, and still is, one of the building blocks that allowed Argentina not only to revitalize its productive and commercial sectors, but also, and perhaps more importantly, to leave behind many years of mistrust and assumptions of conflict with our neighboring and fellow countries. This support of integration was also underpinned by the demilitarization process, the signing of agreements and the development of programs that currently allow us to work together on strategic nuclear, energy, and military issues with nations such as Brazil and Chile, something that would have been unthinkable shortly before and during the non-democratic governments in our countries. In fact, by December of 1978, Argentina and Chile were on the brink of war. Today, both countries have a common brigade to be deployed at the United Nations request of peacekeeping operations. Also, in the 70s, international analysts speculated about which country, Argentina or Brazil, would be the first to test a nuclear bomb. Nowadays, though, nuclear scientists from both countries work together, and a bilateral agency on nuclear verification is about to reach 20 years of activities. After more than 2 decades of democracy, the Southern Cone has evolved from an area with state borders highly militarized to a region with virtual no hypothesis of conflict, and our military work together as peacekeeping forces in Haiti. This is not a minor accomplishment. We are convinced that regional security is better achieved by integration and not by deterrence, avoiding in this way an absurd weapon race in a continent that is still struggling with child malnutrition. This development has been steadily enhanced and has promoted dialogue and the sharing of experiences, all of which has helped us discover that the road forward must be built collectively and never individually. At the same time, we must acknowledge our particular histories and realities, and we must help one another and work together to achieve a better future for all. Likewise, in a wider geographical level, meaning all of South America, we have also promoted the role played by UNASUR, the new kid in the block, that has just proved itself as a regional forum with an ability to solve political problems between our nations, and where Argentina carries a differentiated weight as a bridge between blocks, as well as an institutional responsibility as head of the General Secretariat of this organization. On the global terrain, international terrorism, drug trafficking, and related crimes are scourges that we must face jointly and multilaterally by developing domestic programs to combat them, but also by working together to eliminate them. Let me once again highlight the absolute commitment of the Argentine government in the fight against international terrorism, particularly in the pursuit and prosecution of those responsible for the attacks against the Embassy of Israel and the Argentine Jewish Mutual Association in Argentina. In her last speech to the General Assembly, President Fernández de Kirchner expressed our claim for justice and took the opportunity to address once again the Islamic Republic of Iran in relation to the terrorist attacks. While acknowledging the existence of these threats, we are convinced that our agendas cannot be limited exclusively to their management and control. We must expand our horizons to find new ways of cooperating that enable us to build more inclusive societies that will weaken the appeal of violence that feeds on poverty and desperation. In a multipolar world, we firmly believe that there should be a review of the agencies which allow increased participation in the decision-making process, as well as the creation of a new paradigm that incorporates natural changes that have occurred after the early post-World War II. As I mentioned, it is evident that many of the answers to the numerous crises that we have experienced have not provided long-term solutions. Most have failed to promote equity and stability, fostering periods of turmoil, both political and economic. Argentina promotes an international system where consensus, negotiations, and dialogue prevail, where there is no absolutely rule by a few, and where cooperation is a tool which offers more positive and longer-lasting results than sanctions. This is why, both domestically and abroad, we press for growth and development in a multilateral framework, always within the scope of democracy, justice, equity, and full respect for the diversity of all kinds, in societies that are economically, politically, and culturally inclusive and open. This multilateralism must be respected, not only verbally, but also in deeds. That is why we urge that the decisions made by the bodies are followed up and adopted. In our modern world, it is inconceivable that colonialism is maintained, that double standards exist, and that countries like the United Kingdom ignore the United Nations and the entire international community, which have endlessly requested that it sit down to discuss and negotiate with Argentina about the sovereignty of the Malvinas, South Georgia, South Sandwich Islands, and the surrounding maritime areas over which we are convinced of our rights. There has been lately a whole new chapter of media interest on the issue due to the British unilateral decision to drill in disputed waters, which led us to the natural protest by the Argentine government, widely supported by the Argentine opposition parties. Argentina does not recognize the competence of jurisdiction of any authority other than its own to establish the conditions to enable activities related to hydrocarbons in the areas mentioned. Any attempt to authorize such activities not originating in the Argentine government constitutes unlawful action under both Argentine and international law. My dear friends, I invite you to consider just the possibility of an environmental disaster similar to the one occurred in the Gulf of Mexico, in Patagonian waters following such activities. It would mean a political nightmare that would affect not only the bilateral relations, but which would also escalate to a regional level. About the alleged use of the Argentine government of the Malvinas questions, and the fact that it is an old claim since the islands have been governed from London since 1833, it is worth to remember, in fairness, that it should be added that such occupation was possible by virtue of an act of force, since the British fleet expelled Argentinian population and authorities in Malvinas under the threat of weapons, while the Argentine Republic was still consolidating itself as an independent state, and by a world power with which Argentina maintained friendly relations. After more than a century, the colonialist logic of taking territories thousands of miles away to have access to new sources of natural resources is still alive. The fuel dispute in the South Atlantic is the proof. It is inconceivable that the member of the UN Security Council insists on ignoring this claim, and the rest of the world about the need to pacific negotiations of the sovereignty issue of Malvinas and the South Atlantic Islands. However, let me be clear about this. The memory of the Argentine dictatorship and the 1982 war, which resulted only beneficial to the Thatcher administration, should not cloud the analysis of the current situation. My government, as the United Kingdom one, is convinced that there are no chances of a military dispute. We maintain friendly relations and share views on the need to fight international terrorism, deepen democracy and human rights, and we work together with Great Britain on the G20 and the International Atomic Energy Agency. Let me refer now to the global economy. We recognize that capital is one of the major pillars of successful nations, together with work, decent work. This is why we encourage serious and committed investments which will surely not only provide benefits, but will also strengthen and improve the welfare of all, thereby creating a virtuous circle that will give rise to new opportunities. In discussing these issues, I must also mention that on many occasions, this type of capital only sought short-term gains, as is the case today, there are groups that do not seek to enhance growth and its rewards, but only pursue outright speculation. Thankfully, their objective has been fully demonstrated, disconnecting them from actual investors and branding them as the vulture funds that they are. As you may already know, vulture funds carry out exhaustive lobbying efforts to pressure Argentina to pay off bonds that, after Argentina defaulted its debt in 2001, they have been buying for mere pennies. In 2005 and again this year, Argentina negotiated 2 swaps that have reached an agreement with bondholders, representing 92% of the defaulted bonds. Nevertheless, vulture funds declared their opposition to both swaps as they want more. That being said, the Argentine people are about to close a sad chapter in the history of the debt dating back to the dictatorial regime in Argentina from 1976 to 1983. As early as 1978, Senator Edward Kennedy referred to the relationship between the financial agencies and the murderers of over 30,000 Argentinians. Quoting the great senator, he said, "It is apparent that in some countries, in the wake of the termination or reduction of aid by the United States government, private American banks are more than filling the gap with private capital. Massive funding such as this may be what enabled 5 Latin American governments whose assistance had been reduced in response to human rights violations to reject all United States aid and continue their anti-democratic practices and violations of human rights." End of quote. Senator Kennedy was not alone. I remember that in those times, in addition to him, while I was in the US with political asylum, I also met with remarkable members of the US Senate to denounce the military dictatorship. Among them, Jacob Javits, Frank Church, Max Baucus, Paul Tsongas, Richard Lugar, Donald Riddle, Howard Metzenbaum, John Chaffee, Larry Kressler, Richard Stone, Claiborne Pell, Carl Levy, Patrick Leahy, John Warner, Gene Exxon, Rudy Boschwitz, George McGovern. I also met with a young senator who now is Vice President of the United States, Joseph Biden. Since I know many of you are interested in reaching an ultimate solution to the foreign debt issue, interest shared by the Argentine government, I want to express my concern about 2 vulture funds established in tax havens and their lobbyists that have put in place a systematic attack to prevent the parties from reaching an agreement. These 2 vulture funds are Elliott Associates, founded by Paul Singer, and EM Limited, headed by Kenneth Dunn, who has renounced his US citizenship to avoid paying taxes. Both of these vulture funds are based in the Cayman Islands and have joined forces to boycott Argentina. Let me now go back to the main problem of the global financial architecture: inequity. The world continues to fail to enhance development and in many cases provide inadequate results that demonstrate their inability to promote or to advance more cohesive and economically to solid societies. The system should be more transparent and include greater participation of developing countries, also incorporating a vision that goes beyond traditional reductionism. The current model has provided us with experiences that have not been at all positive. It is important to understand that funds should be channeled to allow a true jumpstart of the different economies, also providing them with a productive insight that includes social responsibility as an important factor of their consolidation. Therefore, as previously mentioned, the promotion of medium and long-term capital flows is vital, avoiding the destabilizing impacts of short-term flows. The creation of a multilateral mechanism that allows the restructuring of sovereign debt should be supported. Another thing that must be added is a greater control of tax havens and the regulation of capital flight. One of the most perverse examples that undermines the progress of countries, since these funds disappear within the economies without even providing a tax contribution, or in many cases are used directly in money laundering schemes. Another pending issue on the international level refers to the regulation of the rating agencies, so as to provide increased transparency and an objective and realistic framework for economics. As diplomatic negotiations are the solution for the Malvinas question, multilateralism is the way to go for global problems. The G20 has been an initial valid answer to the world financial crisis. The group embodies the concepts of effective negotiations with wide representation. Accordingly, the multilateral initiatives undertaken in the framework of the G20 are a step forward to those undertaken by the G8. The G20 has incorporated a necessary and sought-after representation, thereby democratizing dialogue under a common goal. Argentina, together with Brazil and Mexico, has played an active role and contributed with new perspectives, in particular in regard to its support of a long-term sustainable and balanced growth, and by introducing topics that were not properly prioritized by the major countries and were therefore not included in the global economic agenda. We insist on the inclusion and discussion of issues that are inextricably linked in the quest for a sustainable growth, such as the provision of decent jobs, the struggle to end poverty, the need to sustain food security, the promotion of developing alternative energy sources, environmental protection, and tackling climate change, and reforming institutions and the financial system, issue which I referred to earlier. With reference to the timely topic of employment, an area in which our country has persistently worked, we have found a strategic ally in President Obama's administration. The possibility of extending the benefits of Social Security to informal workers and their families, as well as the implementation of an employment guarantee and training for the unemployed, so that they can subsequently have more opportunities to return to work, are some of the areas in which we are working and hope to continue to do so. At the 4 summits that have taken place, results have been achieved in several areas. One aspect that should be highlighted refers to the increase of resources at the World Bank and the multilateral development banks, whose capital has increased by $350 billion. Since 2008, the developing countries' voting power in the World Bank has also increased by 4.59%. The Global Agricultural and Food Security Program was launched to provide financial to low-income countries so that they can improve agricultural productivity, raise rural incomes, and promote the development of sustainable agricultural systems. However, beyond the measures taken and others to be taken in the future, it is obvious that the crisis has had considerable consequences, and by the end of 2010, over 60 million additional people will live in extreme poverty, with a gradual decline of the education, health, and labor systems that will in turn increase marginalization and inequality. There is still much work to be done, but we believe that we are on track, especially because there seems to be a greater willingness to understand the problems of the lower income and most severely impacted regions. However, we must place greater emphasis on assistance and solving issues that represent life or death for millions of people, such as fighting hunger and providing access to clean water, health, and education. My friends, Argentina is a mid-sized country on economic terms. Therefore, it is one of the smallest among the G20 members. However, the successful policies applied after the acute crisis and default in 2001 have made of Argentina a relevant actor to deal with the international crisis. Let me share with you some numbers to understand the recent and historic process of growth of Argentina, which slowed down during the global crisis, but it is recovering the pace it had between 2002 and 2008. In 2002, the GDP fell by 11%. Prices rose by 41%, and poverty hit a record rate of 57% of the population. The GDP had fallen by over 20% between 1998 and 2002, giving rise to the most severe depression in Argentine history, even worse than that of the 1930s. One of the first measures was to decide the flotation of the peso and the stabilization of its value according to market signals. At the same time, the government started to implement a new economic plan based on budget surplus, foreign exchange flexibility, surplus in the autonomous balance of payments, and adjustment of money supply to demand. The state also played a more active role in terms of investments, regional development, and welfare policy. The increase in fiscal revenues to finance the foregoing measures was one of the main instruments of income distribution, so as to reduce the social disparities created by this crisis. The change in relative prices and the consequent expansion of output and exports of goods and services as a result of currency flotation made it possible to reverse the economic cycle and gave way to a growth process which lasted since the second half of 2002 until the end of 2008. The expansion of world demand for agricultural and agri-industrial products was a factor that contributed to supplement domestic policies that favoring a strong increase in our exports. In 2003-2008, the GDP grew by over 50%, recording average annual growth rates higher than 8%. The impact of the global crisis on Argentina could be seen on the deceleration of the 2000 growth rate, which records an increase near the percentage point. However, the GDP is expected to increase over 7% by 2010. Statistics corresponding to the second quarter of 2010 show a GDP increase of 11.8% in relation to the same period of 2009. Thus, the current GDP, reaching around $386 billion, it's around $9,500 per capita, exceeded the levels found before the current crisis. The recovery of economic activity was reflected in the labor market, where employment indicators continued to improve. By the late 2008, non-employment rate had reached 7.3%, matching the level of October 1992. That is the lowest rate in the last 16 years. In 2009, the unemployment rate continued to be of one digit, although it rose to 8.7% due to the effects of the crisis. Employment indicators improved once again in 2010. According to the National Institute of Statistics and Census, the greater number of people employed together with the recovery of salaries enabled a gradual reduction in poverty and extreme poverty levels from 54% and 28% of the total population in 2003 to 13.2% and 3.5% in December 2009. As for the fiscal situation, the federal budget execution recorded a surplus for the 7th consecutive year in 2008. The main reason for such an evolution was the expansion of tax revenues, which made it possible to stick to the objective of keeping balanced fiscal accounts in spite of a strong increase in government current expenditure and investment. As a result of the deceleration in the pace of revenue expansion and a significant increase in public expenditure triggered by the implementation of counter-cyclical measures, the 2009 primary surplus was 47% lower than that of 2008. This situation was reversed in the first 6 months of 2010, since revenues increased again over expenditures. After debt interest payments, a financial surplus of $46 million was recorded, while in the first half of 2009, there was a deficit of $461 million. The Argentine Central Bank stuck to its policy of maintaining a managed flotation of the peso, adjusting money supply to the people's demand for pesos. The real exchange rate continued to be over the average level recorded in the previous decade, when Argentina kept up a convertibility regime by which there was a fixed parity with the US dollar. International reserves reached a record of 50 billion by September 2010. Regarding foreign trade, export recorded a 173% increase between 2002 and 2008, exceeding $70 billion. There was a strong increase in industrial manufactures as well, both boosted by motor vehicles and parts and accessories, and therefore Brazil and Mexico being the main destinations. In 2009, Argentine foreign trade was affected by a recessive world economy. Exports of goods fell by 21% and imports shrunk by 32%. In both cases due to lower prices and a reduction in quantities, and consequently the trade balance surplus hit a record level of around $70 billion, that is a surplus of 35% over the last year. Summing up, Argentina in December completed its 8th year of consecutive growth, leaving behind the deeper economic and social crisis in 200 years of history. The continued growth process was characterized at times by having a favorable international context in relation to the evolution of our terms of trade, and at other times by the threat of international financial crisis. Since 2002, the weight of public debt to GDP was reduced to a third part, the foreign debt having a magnitude equivalent to 12 times the international reserves in the central bank is now little more than 1.5 the reserves, and the external debt that meant 300% of our export represents today 82%. The government gave priority throughout this period to a growth model based on a very clear incentive to encourage domestic production, promoting employment, recovery, and strengthening the gradual but sustained improvement of pensions. In these 8 years, millions of new jobs have been generated. The external debt involved a substantial change by breaking a history of dependency on capital flows and short-term debt. Argentina did so by establishing a principle that will prevail in the relationship between sovereign debtors and creditors. Only growing country can pay its debts. In these last few minutes, allow me to refer to the role that Argentina wishes to play in the region, our commitment in this regard, and our national objectives. Regarding the goal I mentioned about the international role played by our country, we believe that the contribution that we can make jointly with other countries of the region is to encourage a more pluralistic political dialogue that continues to include and prioritize our issues and interests in the ongoing discussion. We believe that Argentina has played a role and will continue to do so as a reliable partner in the region, one that seeks to build bridges for promoting dialogue and the peaceful settlements of differences that may arise. We also believe that the role played by Argentina can be copied elsewhere to foster and reinforce the dialogue or joint positions between diverse groups such as the G20 and the G77. We highly value the work we do together with the countries in the region in the framework of activities under the umbrella of the UN. A clear example of it are the actions of peacekeeping that we perform in Haiti, which embodies our state policy and has allowed us to provide assistance in many latitudes, together with the humanitarian aid we also offer through the white helmets. In view of all this, it becomes clear that the guidelines of Argentina's foreign policy cannot be removed from the core purpose of our government's actions to develop domestically, and which is, in short, to improve the quality of life for all Argentinians. Our concern is centered on providing equal welfare opportunities to all citizens, reducing inequalities and injustice, promoting decent work and access to education and health, as well as cooperation and fair trade with the most possible number of countries, integrating the benefits of science and technology, and cultivating a harmony with our neighbors. We hope to replicate these goals abroad and have no doubt that we will do everything we through our contributions and committed involvement to achieve this. Thank you very much.